I want to bring in Susan Page. She's a Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Thanks for joining us, Susan.
Great to be with you.
Okay, so let's talk about these new guidelines in terms of immigration from the Department of Homeland Security. Let's look at what Donald Trump said during the campaign, the sort of rhetoric that he used, how it's evolved and where we've come to now. Because he was sort of hardline, and then he started to say, hey, we have compassion, we're just going to focus on criminals. And now we have these new guidelines that look like something else.
He's in some ways is pretty consistent with what he said during the campaign, which was he was going to crack down on illegal immigration. And actually, the thing that he's carved out does represent an evolution of his thinking, which is that they explicitly protect kids who are the so-called dreamers, who got some protection in the Obama administration. But other than that, he is making most of the illegal immigrants in this country subject to deportation, and he is in many cases limiting the legal remedies that they have to rely on.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of legal challenges could he face?
Well, this is consistent with the law. This law has been in place for previous administrations, but they've chosen to enforce it in different ways, to set different priorities, because there's a limited number of people we'll be able to deport. Yeah, he is calling for hiring 10,000 more immigration agents, for expanding the number of immigration courts, to expand detention facilities, for changing that catch and release program that's been controversial. So this is really far-reaching. These are fundamental shifts in the way we handle illegal immigration, and it's going to roll out over time, because you need to have some of these additional agents hired before you can start to take some of these steps.
And we should, President Obama deported a record number of people during his administration. So how much of a shift is this from what President Obama did?
Well, we think the numbers are likely to go up over what President Obama did during his administration. And also, the sort of people who are going to be subject to deportation, that group is going to get bigger. It's going to include people who have been here for less than 2 years, for instance, could be deported on a fast-track procedures that limit their legal remedies. Or people who come here for asylum could be immediately deported to Mexico while their asylum appeals are being held. So these changes are pretty extensive, and they go through from the beginning to the end of this immigration process that we have in this country.
Now, people are voicing their opinion loudly across the country, not only about the immigration stuff, the travel ban, but also the Affordable Care Act. Lawmakers are going back to their homes, and they're getting an earful. But I'm wondering, what you think about this type of activism, if you want to call it that. Can it really change policy? Showing up at these town hall meetings like this, screaming and yelling and disrupting them.
Well, it reminds me a little of the Tea Party protests in 2009 and 2010 on the Republican side, and the Tea Party had a huge impact on the Republican Party. The Tea Party, in some ways, laid the groundwork for President Trump to seek and win the Republican nomination. I think they can have a big impact. We don't know if the activists that we see now, the protesters we see now at town hall meetings, will have the same kind of sustained protest, be organized in the same way the Tea Party became to be organized. But it certainly has the potential to have a big impact.
But in this case, these are, when it came to the Tea Party, these were other Republicans yelling at Republican lawmakers saying, get it right. We don't like the way you're representing us. Now we have sort of people who are opposed to Donald Trump yelling at Republican lawmakers saying, you better make sure that this guy in office, doesn't mess things up.
That's a great point, because while Donald Trump has record low approval ratings for a president at this point in his tenure, he has very solid approval ratings among Republicans. In the Gallup poll, 84% of Republicans still support him. That's comparable to what Ronald Reagan was getting at this point among Republicans, or what Barack Obama was getting at this point among Democrats. What President Trump has failed to do is to expand, though, his level of support. So he gets almost no support from Democrats, and his support among independents is pretty low. It's at about 38% in the Gallup poll.
So while we see these images of people yelling at lawmakers, they're generally Democrats or liberals in staunchly Republican districts. And so the question is, does that translate to any kind of, are those Congress are the people in those districts, are they in danger of losing those seats? Or is it just, I know you're going to come out here, I know you're going to protest, but it's not really going to affect my position?
I don't think we know yet. Yeah. And you don't know really the course of this. I was in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas last week to speak to the Girl Scouts. And this is, believe me, this is Trump territory. Trump had no problems carrying the state of Kansas. And people are hoping he's going to do what he what he said he was going to do during the campaign. But there is also some unease about kind of the tone he's taken in the White House and some concern about the tweets he's issued and the fights he's picked. So these are signs of concern early on in a presidency, at a point where most presidents are in a kind of honeymoon period. That has not been the case with President Trump.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, if there are a swath of voters who voted for President Trump because they really didn't like Hillary Clinton, they thought she was a flawed candidate, this is beyond the base. These are people who switched sides because they didn't like the other candidate. Now they're sort of united in the fact that they don't like President Trump.
Also, will President Trump be able to deliver on the promises he makes? Will he be able to bring manufacturing jobs back to this country? Will he be able to replace the Affordable Care Act with something that works for people? You know, reality is the fundamental political test for any president, and that'll be true for this one, too.
Susan Page of USA Today, we appreciate the time as always.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.